This is interesting to stand in here and be interviewed about this particular body of work. So your question is, who am I? Well, I'm living in Iowa City. I've been living here since I moved here in '87. And the reason I moved here was to get a degree in something. I wanted to get an education, and I started out in theater. Now, I was not the typical age after I was graduated from high school. I went to Kirkwood for a while, got married very young, and started a photo business, portrait business. And I really believe, I know, that that's influenced my work a lot. You see a lot of people in my work, maybe not so much in these, but I do. I have another series called Lost in the Midwest, where I photograph individuals, a few couples, but a lot of individuals. So my portrait background, I spent from 1976 until 1987, when I moved to Iowa City. And during that time, I ran this business. I purchased it from another younger woman than I was at the time. I was pretty young. And what a learning experience. It was huge. I mean, all of a sudden, I was running a business in Bellevue, Iowa. Well, anyway, that was my first exposure, really, to photography professionally. So that part of my life really influenced me later in life. I ended up meeting Elaine Zalis. She was my rhetoric teacher. And she pulled me aside and said, "Do you know Hans Brader?" And I said, "No." And so she pointed me, it was the rhetoric building that's no longer there. Anyway, she pointed me downwards to the old music building and said, "Well, go over there and, you know, roam around a little bit. Hans is on sabbatical right now, but Steve Straight's there. You can go in and check it out." Well, I did, and it was the strangest experience. Like I said, I was about 35 then, somewhere in that neighborhood. And it was the strangest experience of walking in and seeing this really small gallery that was all darkened but had spotlights in various places. And I didn't know it at the time, but John Philwalk had a show up, and there were a bunch of old student desks, the kind that hooked together. And then there was a teacher desk and a blackboard and kind of eerie lighting. And then on top of that, there was a dead fish on top of every desk. And I was very perplexed. That would be a great word. I was just like, what is this about? I don't get it. This is not like any art I've ever seen before in my life. And I'd never studied art, really. I mean, I'd taken painting and drawing at Kirkwood, but nothing beyond that. So then I wandered around, and John came through the building, and I met him, and he says, "You should go up and talk to Steve Straight." So I went up into this, this video space, and I met Steve, and I left there just thinking, I don't know, I'm getting goosebumps. I left there just really thinking it was like home. It was like it was like a magnet, and I needed to come back. So I got into that program and got out of theater, got into that program. But it took me a while to realize that I should probably go to graduate school. And Steve Straight was also instigative in that, because he goes, "Well, what are you going to do when you, get your undergrad?" And I go, "Well, I think I'm going to get my education degree, and I want to teach high school." And he goes, "I don't think you want to teach high school." And I said, "Why not?" He goes, "They have a lot of rules. I don't really like rules very much." He goes, "I think you should just stay in this program and get your MFA in intermedia." And I said, well, that sounds fabulous. You know, lots of money later. That's what I did. And it was like the most interesting, fascinating, curious journey experience I've ever had in my life. Just that journey, that crazy time that I spent in intermedia. So anyway, that really informed my work as well as me. So that brings me to this show, sort of, because I was doing a lot of collage. This is collage, only this is updated collage, or diptychs, triptychs, whatever you want to call them. But it's still putting images together that don't really belong together, but once you put them together, new meaning comes out of them. And I remember David Dunlap mentioning that. He was one of my media drawing teachers. He said, it doesn't really matter what you put together, they'll end up speaking to each other. Maybe some of it's kind of dissident speaking, some of it is melodic, but it just, and that's what really intrigued me about collage, is that you can do that. And it's also this nice process, which photography on its own, just doing portraits, isn't nearly the same process. The fun part of portrait photography is doing the shoot, right? It's doing the shoot, like spending an hour and a half or 2 hours or 3 hours with somebody for a long period of time. You sort of develop this relationship with them, you get to know them, and then you get these images in the end. But then you have to sit down and edit, and I'm not so thrilled with that. And the same thing happened before that when I used film. I was like, oh, well, now I have to print these. Okay. So the fun part for me is the shooting. But with these, almost all of these photographs were put together using pictures from my archive. And I've got a huge archive of photos, lots of which never get shown. So what's fun is working on them in Photoshop, and that's how I made these, is all using Photoshop. I mean, when I originally started putting these together in, I think, 2017 or thereabouts was the first part one, and I had no idea how to really even think about them, because I think what happens is you start making pieces and pretty soon they make themselves in a way. You have to let the art do its own thing. You can't be rigid and say, no, I want this, because half the time you're wrong. So, visual poetry. The other thing is I always title them. They're never untitled, because I feel like titles lend another layer to what I'm trying to convey in it. Hugh Lifston called me yesterday and he said to me, which I thought was interesting because no one else has mentioned it, he says, wow, Sandy, did you consciously think about the scale, the size of your images? Because he said, I noticed they're much smaller than the last show we'd seen of mine, Lost in the Midwest, where I was doing like 20 by 30, pretty large images for the most part. I said, yes, I did intentionally want them smaller. And I also, well, I'll tell you, the reason is I just wanted people to have to get closer and to really get more curious about everything rather than standing a great distance away. So that's one of the reasons. Then the other reason I was telling him is that I wanted them to almost look like little, I don't think really curiosity boxes, but like little, Joseph Cornell comes to mind. I don't know if you know, he was one of my inspirations when I was making assemblages, Joseph Cornell. He's long gone. But I also was really thoughtful about what kind of frames I wanted. And I talked to Nick about it, and I said, I want gold frames. He goes, what? Like, I don't want white and I don't want black. So what am I going to do? And then he came up with this idea of mixing gold and silver, and I'm like, oh, I love it. Because they're just a little more precious, I think. And they're a little warmer than either white or black. So yeah, I'm a big fan of how these look framed. They really capture what I was hoping them to, well, I don't even know how to say that, but I think they really capture how I wanted them to look in a gallery. Yeah, a curator, Sean Page, I just had a show up at the Waterloo Arts Center with my friend and colleague, Susan Coleman. And it's the same work, but it was called Earthly Beauty because we put both of our works together. And Sean kept saying over and over again, he loves music as well as I do too. And he just kept talking about how musical they were. And he says how you've got this beat bop thing going on, and in this one you've got the bass guitar, and I'm like, oh, I don't know. I just know they're not straightforward images, and I also love text. So I guess that's where I came up with this visual poetry idea. I like Gertrude Stein. I like how kind of wacky, and what other word would you use to describe? Surreal, unusual, unconventional. I like all that stuff, and I like Dorothy Parker's humor. Well, Gertrude Stein is also humorous in many ways. I really like playing, and that's what this body of work lets me do.